Two to draw attention. One joked that Elise's dress must be a family heirloom, while another asked if she'd come straight from a flea market. The comments were sharp, cruel, but disguised under the veneer of fake friendliness. Elise smiled softly, responding with grace, even as her heart pounded in her chest. The final blow came when Chloe lifted her phone and snapped a photo, capturing Elise mid-blink, awkwardly positioned against a backdrop of glittering excess. She announced to her millions of followers that Elise was the night's boldest fashion choice, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Laughter echoed through the ballroom as more guests saw the post, and Elise's picture quickly made the rounds. Her cheeks flushed with heat, her body still as stone. In that moment, surrounded by laughter, whispers, and flashing cameras, Elise realized this night wasn't about celebration at all. It was a stage, and she had been cast as the joke. Elise sat still, trying to find a safe place in her mind as the noise around her grew louder. What had started as subtle whispers and sideways glances was now a full-blown spectacle. It wasn't just fashion commentary anymore, it was cruelty, veiled in laughter and passed around like party favors. Every corner of the ballroom seemed to hum with quiet mockery, and she felt the walls pressing in. She had expected awkwardness, maybe a few judgmental looks, but this was calculated. It was growing darker by the minute. Chloe was the first to escalate things further. She returned with her phone held high, this time switching to video. With a voice thick with sarcasm, she announced Elise as the night's surprise guest, the humble addition to a room full of million-dollar gowns. Her tone was light, playful even, but her eyes burned with satisfaction. Elise looked away, refusing to give the camera any more than a composed silence. But Chloe wasn't done. She spun a slow circle around Elise with her phone, capturing the contrast between Elise's simple linen and the glittering opulence around her. Then Miranda stepped forward, carrying a glass of deep red wine, her smile rehearsed and falsely sweet. With a flourish, she stumbled slightly, the wine flying from her hand and landing in a dark splash across Elise's dress. Gasps followed, and Elise froze in place, her heart stopping as the cold liquid soaked through the soft fabric. Miranda's hands went to her mouth in mock shock, her voice full of fake concern as she apologized, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. The deep crimson spread like a wound across Elise's lap, drawing eyes, attention, and more phones. Elise bit the inside of her cheek, trying to hold back the tears burning behind her eyes. Her dress, which had once made her feel quietly confident, now looked stained and ruined under the harsh ballroom lights. The crowd didn't flinch. If anything, it energized them. The laughter picked up, the glances turned bolder. Someone muttered something about her coming from the wrong neighborhood. Another guest, a man with a gold watch and too much cologne, laughed and said she must have won a ticket to get in. As Elise tried to compose herself, she noticed security shifting near the edge of the room. Two officers, Calvin and Trent, began moving toward her. Their expressions were uncomfortable, as if they already knew they were walking into something wrong. Sabrina's voice suddenly rang out from the stage, syrupy and insincere, addressing the crowd with exaggerated concern. She claimed that for the safety of the guests, there needed to be a quick inspection of Elise's gift, suggesting that something about it had caused alarm. Murmurs swept through the hall like a breeze laced with suspicion. Eyes turned from curiosity to unease, their judgment now sharpened by fear. Elise's hands trembled slightly as she passed the small package to the guards. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with rustic twine, simple, personal, and thoughtful. Calvin accepted it gently and began unwrapping it in front of the entire crowd. What emerged was a beautiful hand-stitched blanket, delicately embroidered with soft pastel threads. It had taken her days to make. Every stitch carried meaning, every detail chosen with care. But instead of admiration, the room erupted in derisive laughter. A woman in a sequined gown clapped mockingly, calling it the cutest donation to a thrift store she'd ever seen. From the stage, Sabrina added her own knife twist of commentary, mocking the gift as sweet but tragically misplaced. Her voice was light, but her words were sharp enough to cut deep. Elise stood in stunned silence, the humiliation now layered, her appearance mocked, her intentions twisted, her kindness publicly degraded. Even her gift, something heartfelt and handmade, was turned into a joke. Jessica, the TV host among Sabrina's friends, seized the moment and began live streaming again, narrating Elise's unfolding humiliation like it was entertainment. Her followers watched in real time as she laughed about the most memorable gift in high society history. Elise felt herself retreat inward. The shame, the betrayal, the overwhelming sense of being completely alone in a room full of eyes and no compassion pressing down on her from all sides. And though her legs stayed planted and her chin stayed lifted, her heart began to splinter under the weight of it all. Just as Elise thought the night couldn't become any more unbearable, the air in the ballroom shifted. It was subtle at first, a ripple of sound from outside, a low hum growing louder, like distant thunder rolling in from the sea. People paused mid-conversation. Phones were lowered. Heads turned. A pair of massive double doors creaked open at the entrance to the ballroom, and through them poured the glow of polished headlights cutting through the night. Outside, a convoy of sleek black Rolls-Royces had pulled up in perfect formation, the kind of arrival reserved only for those who carried serious power. A hush fell over the room. The laughter faded. Even the most jaded guests couldn't help but lean forward. From the lead car stepped a tall man in a perfectly tailored black suit, every line precise, every detail carefully considered. The light from the crystal chandeliers caught the polished leather of his shoes and the quiet confidence in his stride. Guests murmured in disbelief. It was Dominic Blake, the reclusive billionaire known for building one of the world's most influential private empires. He rarely appeared in public and never attended social events like this. His presence alone carried the weight of authority, and his silence was more commanding than any speech. He didn't glance at the crowd or acknowledge the awestruck faces turning to him. His focus was singular. His eyes moved through the room until they found her, Elise, still standing near the edge of the hall, her linen dress stained with wine, her expression composed but broken underneath. In that moment, everything else disappeared. The gossip, the judgment, the spectacle, it all fell away. Dominic walked straight to her, each step calm and deliberate, until he stood at her side and gently took her hand in his. The room gasped. Not whispered. Gasped. He spoke her name with warmth, and Elise's eyes filled with tears, not from embarrassment or shame, but from the sheer relief of being seen, of being held up instead of torn down. The shift was instant and powerful. She was no longer the outsider in linen. She was the woman beside Dominic Blake. The room fell into stunned silence as he turned to face the crowd. He addressed them with a voice full of conviction. He spoke clearly, without anger but with unmistakable disappointment. He told them who Elise truly was, his wife, his partner, and the co-owner of their global empire. The same woman they had mocked had quietly held more power, wealth, and influence than anyone else in the room. The same woman they had laughed at had given more to charity, helped more people, and stood with more grace than they could begin to understand. Elise wasn't just respected. She was deeply admired by the man everyone else feared and revered. Across the ballroom, faces began to fall. Sabrina's smug confidence drained from her in an instant. Her mouth parted in shock, but no sound came out. Her carefully orchestrated plan had unraveled in seconds. Chloe, Miranda, and Jessica froze in place, eyes darting nervously as they realized their roles in what would soon become a very public and very damaging scandal. Their laughter had died. Their bravado crumbled. Dominic didn't need to raise his voice. His presence was enough. And as he stood there, one arm around Elise's shoulders, she felt the ground return beneath her feet. For the first time that night, she breathed deeply. The weight of humiliation began to lift. With Dominic beside her, the shame dissolved, replaced by a quiet, rising power. She wasn't there to be ridiculed. She was there to be recognized, not just for the title or the wealth, but for the strength she had shown when the entire room tried to break her. The tables had turned, not with vengeance, but with undeniable truth. And as the crowd stood frozen, struggling to process the moment, Elise stood taller. Not because she wanted revenge, but because now they knew. Now they saw. The woman they had tried to reduce to a joke was someone far greater than they ever imagined. And she hadn't needed to prove a thing. All she had to do was survive long enough for the truth to walk in and stand by her side. As the ballroom settled into stunned silence, a new voice cut through the tension, not as powerful as Dominic's, but filled with something different. Emotion. Regret. Ethan Whitmore, the groom, stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. His face, once lit with nervous excitement for the big day, now looked strained, eyes flickering between Dominic, Elise, and the woman who had been moments away from becoming his wife. His steps were steady, but the weight on his shoulders was clear. He approached Dominic and Elise with respect, stopping just short of them as if waiting for permission to speak. The room held its breath again. Ethan turned to the guests and began to speak, his voice calm but heavy with truth. He admitted that many of them didn't know the full story of his journey. Years ago, he had been a young entrepreneur with nothing but an idea and a burning desire to prove himself. At that time, the doors he knocked on were closed, and no one saw value in what he was trying to build, except two people, Elise and Dominic. They had offered not only funding, but belief. Elise especially had spent late nights with him, going over pitch decks and financial projections. She asked for nothing in return. She simply wanted to help. She saw him when no one else did. As Ethan spoke, Sabrina's face paled. Her confident posture slipped, and she looked around as if searching for an escape. The truth wasn't just inconvenient. It was shattering everything she had built up, the narrative, the image, the illusion of class and control. Guests who had smiled at her earlier now stared with uneasy expressions, shifting in their designer shoes as the reality of her actions came into sharp focus. Then Ethan addressed her directly. His voice wasn't loud, but every word landed with weight. He said he had once loved her, or thought he did, but now he saw her clearly. What she had done to Elise wasn't just cruel, it was shameful. He expressed deep disappointment, not just in the humiliation she orchestrated, but in the fact that she weaponized race, class, and status to do it. He spoke not as a man embarrassed by the scandal, but as someone genuinely heartbroken that he had been part of it, even unintentionally. Ethan then turned back to the crowd and, with a steady breath, made his announcement. He was calling off the wedding. There would be no vows, no celebration, no future with someone who had shown so little respect for the dignity of others. The gasps that followed were quieter this time, more like ripples of realization than shock. A few people bowed their heads. Some exchanged guilty glances. Sabrina's hands trembled as she took a few hesitant steps toward him, trying to reason, to whisper, to plead, but Ethan didn't falter. He told her plainly that what they had couldn't be salvaged. Her actions tonight had changed everything. Chloe, Miranda, and Felicity stood frozen behind her, visibly shaken. The laughter and mockery from earlier now felt like echoes from another lifetime. Jessica fumbled to turn off her live stream, but not before thousands of viewers had already seen everything unfold. Screenshots and clips were already making their way across social media, and Sabrina's carefully curated image was crumbling in real time. Ethan turned back to Elise with a look of quiet reverence. He thanked her for believing in him when he had nothing, for showing him what real grace looked like. He bowed his head, a gesture of apology and admiration, not because she demanded it, but because she deserved it. Elise, with her calm presence, simply nodded. She didn't gloat. She didn't retaliate. She stood with the same quiet dignity she had carried all night. The ballroom felt different now, less like a wedding and more like a reckoning. What had been meant as a spectacle of wealth and status had turned into a lesson in truth, compassion, and humility. Ethan's decision didn't just end a wedding. It ended the illusion that kindness could be outshone by luxury, or that character could be erased by cruelty. And in that moment, it was clear to everyone present that the real bride of honor was the woman they had once overlooked. The silence that followed Ethan's announcement hung thick in the air. No one moved. The chandeliers still sparkled, the music still played softly in the background, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. Every guest in the ballroom stood frozen between disbelief and discomfort. The people who had once crowded around Sabrina, clinging to her influence and spotlight, were now quietly retreating. Whispers fluttered like startled birds. Faces once lit with laughter were now shadowed with guilt. Dominic gave a quiet nod to his assistant, Natalie Reeves, who immediately stepped forward, tablet in hand. She was sharp, efficient, and already 10 steps ahead. In the chaos of the past hour, she had been reviewing footage from security cameras and compiling public social media posts. Within moments, she had a list, names, timestamps, screenshots. The digital evidence was undeniable. Dominic addressed the room again, this time not with disappointment, but with resolve. He stated calmly that accountability was not optional. No one, no matter their last name or follower count, was above decency. Then, with one more signal, Natalie motioned to 3 security officers standing quietly near the ballroom doors. They began moving toward Chloe, Miranda, and Felicity. The 3 women stiffened, realizing too late that this wasn't just embarrassment, they were being held responsible. Chloe's confidence evaporated as soon as she saw the first guard approaching. Her eyes darted around, searching for someone to defend her. She tried to play it off, calling the whole thing a joke, a misunderstanding. But no one laughed. No one offered her a way out. The officers escorted her gently, but firmly, toward the exit. She didn't resist, but her face was pale and stunned. The influencer who had just moments ago been live-streaming Elise's humiliation was now the one being watched and judged. Next was Miranda. She stumbled as she stepped forward, mascara streaking down her cheeks. She whispered frantic apologies, promising to make things right, but Dominic's voice cut through her rambling. He told her that apologies meant little when they followed cruelty and public mockery. She dropped her gaze, realizing there was no saving her public image this time. Cameras in the crowd caught every second, but this time they weren't cheering her on. They were recording her fall. Then came Felicity. Always the one in the background, laughing the loudest but saying the least. She tried to stay behind, to blend in as the others were let out, but Natalie called her name without hesitation. There was no hiding now. As the security officers reached her, Felicity's composure broke. She turned to Sabrina, who stood frozen on the stage, hoping for some kind of defense. But Sabrina was still too stunned by Ethan's words to move. She offered nothing. Jessica was next. The TV host who had splashed wine on Elise and narrated her humiliation like a red carpet event now stood trembling. She stepped forward without being asked, knowing what was coming. Her voice cracked as she apologized, not to the room, but directly to Elise. She begged for a second chance. But Dominic's expression didn't soften. He asked her if she understood what it meant to deliberately humiliate someone so publicly. Her silence said everything. With each woman escorted out, the ballroom grew quieter, heavier with the weight of realization. This wasn't just about one night. It was about years of unchecked cruelty, about how easy it had become to dehumanize someone for entertainment. Elise hadn't needed revenge. The truth had done all the work. As Dominic stepped back beside Elise, the guests watched with a different kind of gaze, not judgment, not pity, but respect. They had seen her endure humiliation with dignity, and now they were watching justice unfold in real time. Elise had never raised her voice. She hadn't defended herself with anger or insult. Her silence, her grace, and her truth had spoken louder than any performance those women had put on. The fall of the mean girls wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet, controlled, inevitable, and it left the rest of the room with one clear message. The way we treat people, especially when no one's watching, matters more than any gown, title, or curated image. The show was over. The masks were gone. And for the first time that night, the spotlight belonged to the right person. After the final guest responsible for the cruelty had been escorted out, the ballroom seemed to exhale. The tension that had clung to every corner began to dissolve, replaced by something quieter and more profound, reflection. For a few moments, no one moved. The guests stood in place, unsure of what to do, many still processing everything they'd just witnessed. Then Dominic turned to Elise and gently took her hand. His voice, low and warm, wasn't meant for the crowd this time. It was just for her. With a subtle nod, he motioned to Natalie, who stepped forward once again with calm efficiency. A private suite had already been prepared. Inside waited a gown, one that Natalie had chosen not because it screamed wealth or status, but because it reflected the quiet power Elise had shown all night. Elise hesitated for a moment, still holding the soaked remains of her linen dress between her fingers. But then she met Dominic's eyes and felt strength return to her. She nodded and followed Natalie out of the ballroom. Back inside, the guests murmured among themselves, some quietly expressing regret, others stunned by the revelation of who Elise truly was. No one dared speak too loudly. The air felt sacred now, like something delicate was being repaired. Then, the doors at the far end of the room slowly opened again. Elise re-entered, no longer the woman in a stained dress silently enduring the worst of people's judgment. She now walked with quiet authority, her presence commanding attention without a word. The gown she wore was white silk, simple yet stunning, flowing with every step and catching the chandelier light like water in motion. Her hair, now down and soft around her shoulders, framed her face, which radiated calm and confidence. There were no flashy diamonds, no designer logos, just Elise, completely herself, but finally seen for who she was. The effect was immediate. The crowd turned, and without hesitation, began to applaud. Not because she was rich, not because of Dominic, but because they had seen her endure something cruel and still carry herself with more grace than any of them could have imagined. The applause grew louder, not celebratory, but reverent. It was the kind of moment that made people feel small in the best way, reminded of what real strength looks like. Dominic met her halfway and extended his arm with pride. Together, they walked toward the center of the ballroom. The guests instinctively stepped aside to clear a path, some bowing their heads slightly, others whispering words of apology as they passed. Elise didn't need their pity. She didn't want their approval. But something in their quiet gestures felt sincere. This was no longer about correcting a public mistake, it was about acknowledging a private truth. The woman they had tried to ridicule had become a mirror, showing each of them who they really were. Near the front of the room, Ethan stood waiting. His suit was slightly wrinkled now, his eyes still carrying the weight of the decision he'd made. As Elise approached, he bowed his head deeply, his voice low but earnest as he offered a heartfelt apology. Elise didn't hesitate. She placed a hand gently on his shoulder and told him she forgave him. Not because it was easy, but because she had always believed in redemption. Ethan's face softened, and he nodded with quiet gratitude. He turned to Dominic, who offered him a firm, respectful handshake. A bond had been forged through truth, one built on character, not status. Guests began to step forward one by one, offering apologies, sharing kind words, expressing admiration they hadn't found the courage to voice earlier. And Elise received them all with the same poise she'd shown since the moment she walked into the room. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her presence spoke for itself. For the first time that night, the ballroom felt honest. The show was over. The masks had fallen. And in the soft glow of crystal lights, Elise stood as a quiet, powerful reminder that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it simply stands tall, waits out the storm, and walks back into the room like it belongs there. Because it always did. As the night began to settle and the weight of all that had happened softened into a deep, reflective hush, Dominic stepped toward the stage. His presence, calm and composed, brought a quiet stillness over the crowd once more. He looked out over the faces of the very people who had once whispered and laughed at Elise, the same people now standing in a room transformed, not by chandeliers or luxury, but by the undeniable truth they had all witnessed. Taking a breath, he began to speak, not with anger or accusation, but with sincerity that reached every corner of the hall. He reminded them that the evening had started as a wedding, a celebration of love and partnership, but it had become something far more meaningful. It had revealed the truth of character, both the kind that crumbles under cruelty and the kind that rises above it with grace. He spoke about the danger of valuing appearances more than integrity, of treating others based on status, wealth, or race, instead of recognizing their heart, their kindness, and their humanity. He told them that Elise was not powerful because of the wealth she shared with him, but because of the life she lived quietly, the good she did when no one was watching, and the strength she held when everyone was. The room was silent, not out of fear, but out of respect. Even those who had played no direct part in the cruelty earlier now understood how easily they had stood by. The lesson wasn't just for the ones who had been escorted out, it was for everyone who had looked the other way, laughed too quickly, or judged too easily. Dominic finished with a simple but resonant truth. A person's worth is never determined by their clothes, their bank account, or their social following. It is defined by how they treat others, especially when no one expects them to. Then he turned to Elise, extending his hand, and together they stood in front of the room. Elise looked out at the guests, her eyes soft but steady, and spoke with the same quiet courage she had carried all night. She didn't speak of revenge or shame. She spoke of hope. She asked that everyone leave that night not just with memories of a dramatic event, but with a renewed awareness of how they move through the world. She asked that they teach their children not to follow glamour blindly, but to recognize real strength, real kindness, and real dignity. Her voice was gentle, yet every word landed like truth carried on air. She didn't need to raise her voice to make it powerful. She simply spoke from the heart, and that was enough. She thanked those who had come forward with apologies, and she forgave those who had faltered. Not because they deserved it, but because forgiveness was how healing began. Her grace in that moment wasn't weakness, it was her greatest strength. When she finished, the room didn't erupt in applause. Not right away. There was a beat of stillness, like everyone was holding their breath. And then, slowly, one by one, the guests rose to their feet, not to celebrate spectacle, but to honor integrity. The applause was soft at first, then stronger, full of something much more meaningful than admiration. It was respect. That night didn't end with a wedding reception. It ended with something far more lasting, a shift in perspective. A reminder that character outlasts cruelty, that compassion rises above prejudice, and that the quietest voice in the room can often be the most powerful. Elise and Dominic didn't just leave the ballroom with heads held high, they left having changed it. Not by force, but by truth. And as the final guests departed, hearts full and eyes opened, no one was talking about designer gowns or social status. They were talking about a woman who walked in alone, was torn down in front of a crowd, and rose anyway, with dignity, love, and grace that could not be shaken. A woman who reminded everyone that kindness isn't weakness, and status isn't strength. Character is. And hers lit up that ballroom far brighter than any chandelier ever could. Life has a way of revealing people's true character in the most unexpected moments. Elise's story is a powerful reminder that dignity, humility, and integrity are not only timeless values, they are unshakable strengths. No matter your age or stage in life, how you treat others, especially those who appear different or less fortunate, speaks volumes about who you are. In a world increasingly obsessed with status, appearance, and social media approval, it's easy to forget that real worth isn't worn, it's lived. Elise didn't defend herself with wealth or words. She stood firm in her truth, and her quiet grace silenced a room that once mocked her. For older audiences who have seen the world shift and change, this story reinforces what you've known all along. What lasts isn't what glitters, it's how we carry ourselves when no one expects us to shine. We all have the power to be kind, to stand up for what's right, and to forgive without forgetting the lessons. So the next time you feel small in a room full of noise, remember Elise. You don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to be grounded in who you are. If this message touched your heart, let us know in the comments what kind of stories or lessons you'd love to see next. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another powerful, uplifting story. Your support helps us share more content that truly matters.